welcome to Searching for Goodness. Today we are at the Brea Tar Pits with Dr. Emily. And it was very interesting the way we met. We went to Science Center to see Antarctica movie and the Butterfly Pavilion. And my friend mentioned the PBS documentary, Human Footprint. It was very great, and she was in it. And after that, there was a Q&A, and that's how we met. Can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and the museum and everything to our audience?
Sure. So I'm a curator here at the Brea Tar Pits. I am a paleontologist, and I specialize in the time period that we call the Pleistocene, or the Ice Age, which is a time sort of right before the time that we're living in now, which we call the Holocene, or some people call it the Anthropocene. The Pleistocene was characterized by periods where there was a lot more ice on land. So you had times when, as recently as 18,000 years ago, when half of North America was covered in ice sheets. And then we would go into interglacial periods like today. And what's really notable about it is that during the Ice Age, and actually most of the rest of the Cenozoic time, there were a lot of big animals, especially big mammals walking around the planet. And so here in Los Angeles, in the Pleistocene, we had mammoths and mastodons, which are both, look very similar to elephants. We had saber-toothed cats, like here's a skull of one. These very large cats. We had even bigger cats called American lions. We had large dogs called dire wolves. We had huge bears. We also had camels and horses and giant bison. And then my favorite, giant sloths, which is represented by this little guy here. So we had, they're related to modern tree sloths, but they were here as big as hippopotamuses, and of course they didn't live in trees. And so this was a very different looking ecosystem. We also had a lot of plants and animals that would be familiar to people today. But the reason our site, the Brea Tar Pits, is so important, in fact it's the most important Pleistocene fossil site anywhere in the world, and that's because we have these places where asphalt, which is a grade of crude oil, was seeping out of the ground and forming these shallow, very sticky pools that would occasionally trap some of these large animals, and as well as smaller animals and plants. And it preserved these fossils very, very well. And so we have just an incredible record of what life was like during this time period. And so we're able to study ecosystem change and questions like adaptation and extinction at a very highly detailed scale, which is something that you can't really do at other fossil sites. So it's an incredible place to be a paleontologist, and that's why I'm here.
And what kind of work do you do here? I see labs, and what kind of work is done?
So we have a big team that works here. We actually have an ongoing excavation because these fossil deposits are so numerous and so rich that we still haven't excavated all of the fossils from the deposits that are preserved here. Even after more than 100 years of excavations, we're still excavating. All of those fossils, of course, once they come out, they still have dirt and asphalt adhering to them. Sometimes they're broken, and so they get brought into our fossil lab where they get cleaned and repaired and stabilized and prepared for research. And then we have a really vast collection space where we store the fossils and where visitors, researchers from all over the world can come and do scientific studies on the fossils.
Okay, very good. Yes, as we're in the searching for goodness, in what you do, can you tell us how you find goodness? Where is the goodness in what you do? Aside from the goodness, you can a little bit more mention about the documentary. You were in the PBS documentary too, if you like.
Sure. I think that we find goodness in different ways in our work. I think just on a fundamental level, I work with really great people. I think the collaborative nature of science and working together, in really diverse teams, both with the teams that are working to excavate and prepare and curate the bones here on site, but also all of the colleagues around the world that I collaborate with. Science is something that, impacts us all. The inquisitive nature of science, asking questions about our world, is something that's really fundamental. I think it's part of what makes us human, and so that is something I think that brings people together. And then specifically in the type of work that we do, a lot of the questions that we're asking are really questions that are relevant to creating a sort of sustainable and livable planet today. So questions about the causes of extinction, questions about how can plants and animals be assisted to help weather significant environmental changes like climate change, questions about how humans have impacted ecosystems in negative ways as well as positive ways across millennia. These are all questions that can sort of help support us and everyone we share the planet with, and other species of plants and animals to have a thriving and sustainable world.
So this gets us to our question about environmental issues, global warming, environmental issues. What do you see when you look at the history, and what do you see now and the future about?
So the time period that the fossil record at the tar pits covers includes the last major episode of global climate change. So it starts at a point before what we call the last glacial maximum, and then goes into this period where you have half of North America under ice sheets. There were 3,000 feet of ice on top of Seattle. You had glaciers all the way down, past the Great Lakes and New York, right? And then you go to a point that looks very much like today. And that all happens within a pretty short time period. And, so here in Southern California, we see temperature change of maybe around 5 degrees Celsius in a 1,000-year period, which is very significant, right? 5 degrees Celsius is the difference between, half of North America being covered by an ice sheet and today, basically. And that happens in about 1,000 years, which is really incredibly rapid. However, that's about 1/10 the rate of climate change that we're seeing today. So now we're looking at that level of climate change potentially happening within 100 years. So
it's speeded up?
So the climate change that's being caused today by all of the greenhouse gases, the carbon dioxide and methane that humans have released into the atmosphere through the use of fossil fuels, which is basically, so what a fossil fuel is basically you're taking, in the case of oil, or coal, you're taking the decomposed bodies of organisms, plants, or these single-celled algae that were accumulated over thousands of years, and you're burning them up in 1 year. So you're taking carbon that was accumulated over a very long time, and you're releasing it in a very short time. And so you're sort of unbalancing the input-output of carbon in the atmosphere, and it creates this layer that acts kind of like, some people say, like a heat trapping blanket, or if you think of a car in a parking lot on a sunny day, you may be fairly comfortable outside the car, but you open up your car, you get in, you're like, oh my God, it's 100 degrees in here. And that's because the glass is, sunlight, heat from the sun is going in and it's getting trapped inside. It's not going back out. And that's exactly what's happening to the planet today because of these gases that we've been releasing. And that's having really significant impacts. I mean, you see the level of changes that happened at the end of the Pleistocene, at the end of the Ice Age, when the Earth is warming up. You have a lot of water going, a lot of ice melting. You have major restructuring of plant communities. We saw 100 meters or so, over 300 feet of sea level rise here off the coast of Southern California. You know, that happened over about a millennium. Now it could happen in about a century. And so that's something that scientists are grappling with. And so if we can study in my research, something that I study is how did nature respond? How did plants and animals respond to these types of environmental impacts that were happening? And how can we use that knowledge to help us predict what is going to happen today and maybe help preserve, helps plants and animals survive in the context of these changes, and help human communities be prepared for and weather these sorts of changes that are happening because of the human-caused climate change.
So what are some of the things that we can do? Like, what can governments and corporations can do? What can normal people can do? What can we do to help with this process? I know, for instance, veganism is one thing, but what are other possible things we can do? And also, I know this is causing a lot of animals to go extinct too, which I saw in the documentary, and they mentioned this white wolf. Like, is it possible to bring back more species through that technology?
So it's a great question. So, we know a lot about the major contributors to climate change. Vehicle emissions are one, so gas-powered cars and airplane travel contribute substantially. So pushing your local representatives to make changes in your city where it's easy for people to get around by some way other than a private gas-powered car is really helpful. So like having a really good mass transit system, having a really good safe network of bike paths. We live here in Los Angeles. Yeah. It's a city that it rarely rains. It's very flat. People generally like to exercise. Can you imagine if we had the sort of bike infrastructure that, say, the Netherlands has, how great it would be? I bike to work, my bike's over there, or I'll bike and do a combination of bike and take the bus, but it's really hard because our city isn't set up to support that kind of transit. So that's something that people can advocate for. And the real thing, so that's sort of, a local scale opportunity. But the thing that's really going to make a real impact is large scale sort of national and international will to change. And so really we have to be putting forth elected leaders at the national level that are going to take action on climate change, sign international agreements, stick to those agreements, and really create legislation that encourages the whole energy sector to transition to sources of energy that are not exacerbating the climate change. There are also some technological innovations that can help. So there's a lot of research and development now going into what's called carbon recapture or carbon storage, where they're actually starting to develop technologies that can take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and then it can be stored underground. So investing in those sorts of technologies that could then be scaled up to help draw down carbon that's already in the atmosphere is really valuable. Your question about, in particular, for species, regarding the impact to species and the threat of extinction. There are several things that are threatening species with extinction. Climate change is one of them, but the more urgent and significant effects in this moment, by and large, on land are to some extent poaching, but really it's habitat loss. So it's the loss of forests that are being converted to farmland. It's impacts of habitat, some of which are linked to climate change, like large-scale wildfires, like we saw really devastating fires in Australia a few years ago that they said 3 billion, with a B, animals were either killed or injured in those fires. So part of that, another action that people can take in their daily lives, we know that eating less animal products, so meat, dairy, et cetera, can help reduce the amount of carbon. So, not saying it's not realistic to expect that everybody is suddenly going to become vegan, but people can scale back in their lives. And that's a way that significant impact can be made on climate. You asked about de-extinction. We are a long way from de-extincting anything. I know that a biotech company recently claimed that they had de-extincted a dire wolf, but all they did was change a few genes in a gray wolf that that they think, based on a partial reconstructed ancient DNA genome from a dire wolf, may have given the gray wolf traits similar to what dire wolves had. So maybe they're a little bigger. We know from looking at their fossils, like dire wolves have larger sagittal crests on their heads, right? So they may have been able to give them some traits that were similar to dire wolves, but it's not, they didn't clone a species. They haven't brought back any extinct species. It's really just a genetically modified organism that they created that may have it may look in some ways like a dire wolf looked, or it may act in some ways like a dire wolf acted, but it's nothing close to a recreation of that actual species. And even if it were, even if you could, say, clone these animals, clone an animal, breed them on a large scale, recreate a species, like, just look how much pushback there is to regular gray wolves, which are smaller and less carnivorous, reoccupying parts of their natural ranges that they lived in just less than 100 years ago, right? Like, you haven't solved the problem of human and wildlife conflict, the problem of a lack of habitat, the problem of climate impacts to the habitat. So the idea that now you're going to bring back even larger, arguably more dangerous animals, and that somehow helping conservation is just ludicrous, honestly.
Thank you for your answers. Really got me thinking about it more deeply about it. Okay, thank you. So off the record, when we were chatting earlier a little bit, you asked me how I started about this project. I forgot to mention to you that this book, Oneness, was one of my starting points. It talks about how different religions at the core believe in the same things, and which is what I'm coming into, living in unity. I'm going to read a few quotes and ask your opinion about this. In Christianity, it says, God had made one blood all nations of man. Judaism says, behold, how good and pleasant it is when brothers dwell in unity. Islam says, all creatures are the family of God, and he is the most beloved of God who does most good unto his family. Hinduism, human beings are as head, arms, trunk, and legs unto one another. Shintoism, do not forget the world is one big family. And here in the beginning it also says, fostering growth and development is as natural to a society as desiring advancement in life is to an individual. The greater the harmony and peace in nation, the greater the opportunity for firmly established financial, spiritual, and educational organizations to develop. These organizations allow individuals and the society as a whole to process. The joy of living in society is that each person can derive benefits from every other person's efforts. Each person contributes a little and then receives the best benefit of society's achievements. Material needs and comforts are only one aspect of this collective benefit. A greater aspect is collective wisdom of the spiritual truths that are passed from generation to generation. This wisdom serves as a practical basis for achieving a fulfillment in life. Yes, right now we're in 9/11 of 2025. which already reminds us of a very bad incident that happened in 2001. And in this week, we heard several terrible news.
Yeah.
And I believe a lot of them all start with the lack of unity, sense of unity. So what's your thoughts on that?
I agree. I think the world, our country, but also the world at large is going through a really tough time right now. There certainly are, there's a lot of conflict and strife that we see that is actually very much tied to the environmental crises, especially climate change. A lot of, wars and sort of mass migrations of people are related to crop failures that are being caused by climate change, natural disasters that are tied to more intense weather events tied to climate change. So I think I see kind of relationship between that. I agree that there has been a trend in our nation over the last several years to more and more polarization, more and more us versus them. There are researchers who have tied this to, actually directly in some sense, to the use of social media, because social media has algorithms to maintain engagement. And those algorithms have determined that the more sort of polarized content you receive, the more angry you are, the more time you're likely to spend on that site, and therefore the more ads they can show you. So I think that there's evidence that that type of media, while it does have the potential to bring people together or to give people a sense of community, especially people in who may be in marginalized groups or feel like loneliness, it actually has had some negative outcomes in terms of driving people into this idea that we're somehow in separate camps. I think that there is research to suggest that one thing that people really need to do is go out and be in society, like go to public spaces, go hang out with your neighbors, like talk to people in real life. I think once people go out and interact with people in person, like you are sort of disabused of this idea that, oh, some people are really different and other people are this way and other people are this way and I'm in this camp and I don't have anything in common with these people. And you see that we actually have a lot more in common, including shared challenges and shared goals, than you might think if you just spend time interacting with people on the internet and not in person.
Well said. Yes, I just want to add something on that. I do believe, it's a different interaction, face-to-face, eye-to-eye. Of course, I love in-person interactions, but as a person who's away from her family and, stuck in an office most of the time, I also do like online interactions. I think depends on what we're sharing, and try to go a little bit more for love and support to one another instead of like hating a certain group and like being angry to a certain group, which we all fall into that sometimes. But I think that I'm not like anti-online, but I just think it's good to try to keep giving light through that too, I think. But I agree with everything else you said. It's my little humble opinion. So we always ask about this random question, the birds. What do you think about the birds? And when I went to the museum and saw birds actually come from dinosaurs, I was surprised. I didn't know about that. Maybe I didn't pay attention to Jurassic Park enough. It was mentioned, but
Jurassic Park, they probably should have put feathers on a lot of those birds, like the raptors. I don't think that was really known to science at the time the first Jurassic Park film was made, and then they sort of continued with that aesthetic. But scientists have discovered, there's been some really remarkable paleontological discoveries in the last couple of decades of where they've found, impressions, like body impressions of some dinosaurs that showed that more of them had feathers than we thought. But yeah, birds, they didn't just come from dinosaurs, they actually are dinosaurs. They are the one lineage of dinosaurs that didn't go extinct when that meteor slammed into the planet 66 million years ago.
So they're like one of the longest living creatures on Earth.
In a sense, yeah. I mean, they've been around for hundreds of millions of years. So as far as vertebrates go, sharks have been around longer, turtles have been around longer, but birds are, have this very long lineage in a sense.
What
they're
does
cool.
It say about us? Like, what's the secret of birds managing to survive this long?
Well, they've, evolved in a lot of really cool, creative ways. There are birds that swim, like the penguins. There are huge birds. There are tiny little birds. There are birds that drink nectar out of flowers, that eat insects, they've evolved all the different possible diets in the world, pretty much. And they can fly. So it makes it very easy for them to get from place to place. If there's a change, birds can usually migrate or get to, say, a new location that is maybe more habitable. That being said, there actually was a really large extinction of birds at the same time as the big mammal extinction at the end of the Ice Age. So just when these guys went extinct, we also lost about 30 species of birds just in North America alone, mostly big ones. Here we have fossils from a lot of carnivorous birds, so eagles, vultures, scavengers, things like that. But that's something that our team here is currently working on because most people know about the mammoths and the saber-toothed cats, but very few people know about the extinct Ice Age birds, and so that's something that we're really curious about and trying to find out. Even with all the advantages that birds have in terms of being able to move around when things get bad, how is it that so many didn't make it through this time period?
And do you have any personal connection to birds?
I actually used to have a pet bird.
Oh, yeah? What kind?
He was a cockatiel. So a little yellow Australian bird. My husband had him for many years before we even met, and he died just a couple of years ago. He was 25 years old, which is pretty long-lived for those.
Much longer than any cat and dog I know.
Yeah, his name was Bela, and he was very sweet, very sort of self-absorbed, as many birds are. He loved it. If you'd hold up a mirror, he became obsessed with the stapler at one point.
If you have any pictures, we'd love to see that.
I could probably send you some pictures.
That would be awesome. Yes, last but not the least, we were having a little conversation before we started, and I was very surprised to hear something. I mentioned how I started this project, what was my goal, and Emily said she's been to Antarctica. As some of you, if you've been watching Searching for Goodness for a while, my goal is to go there and make the movie before I start traveling the rest of the continent. So I would love to hear from you. What was your experience in Antarctica? What's your thoughts about it? We talked earlier, but the cameras weren't on. So if you can a little bit repeat what you told me. And you mentioned the U.S. Antarctic program. I'm winking to them. I'm going to be trying that program for sure. So.
Yeah, it was, I was extremely fortunate. So I actually, before I was a paleontologist, I was actually a marine biologist. And so when I was in college, I studied marine biology. I was actually working in a marine biology lab, scuba diving, and I was working with a graduate student who had worked in Antarctica. And after I graduated, he connected me with the people he had worked for, and I had the opportunity to go and work for it's a particular branch of the National Science Foundation, which I hope has not been cut, which is called the Long-Term Ecological Research Program, which is they have a couple of dozen sites that they monitor in sort of U.S. territories and Antarctica over very long periods of time. So even at the time I went, they had already been monitoring this area on the Antarctic Peninsula for more than, I think, 25 years. And so now it's, I mean, soon it will be 50 years of long-term data where you have groups of scientists, each of which specializes in a different component of the ecosystem. So we had an oceanic biogeochemistry lab. We had a phytoplankton lab. So those are the little like plant algae and things that are in the ocean. We had a zooplankton lab, which I was working for, which studied krill and other marine invertebrates. There was a marine birds lab that was studying the penguins and other birds in the ecosystem. And personnel from these labs, you know, every year they, you know, year after year, and then just like day after day, month after month, year after year, they would go and they would take data in the same location. And you would end up with this huge sort of correlated data set. So they could really track, you know, how the bird populations were related to the marine invertebrates, were related to the algae, were related to the chemistry and temperature of the ocean, and understand sort of cyclical dynamics, but also understand, and we have a much better understanding now, how climate change was impacting that ecosystem. And so it was a really incredible experience. It was, you know, it's an incredible scientific enterprise to be a part of, and also just an incredible community, because it is, you know, in our case, we were a very small station. We had less than 40 people there, and everything we needed had to be provided by those 40 people in real time, because we were you know, minimum 4 days by boat from the South American mainland. So, and there was no way for planes or helicopters to land at the station. It was really just everything came in and out by boat. So we had just a really incredible community of people that were all working together towards a shared goal and relying on each other for all of our needs. And it was a really sort of beautiful and great example, I think, of how society can function when everybody is kind of all in.
Exactly what you said there, towards a shared goal.
Yeah.
Everybody coming from different backgrounds, but they're working towards a shared goal. And you suggested something to me. Would you like to mention it again? That you said that in Antarctica, I can interview a bunch of different countries' bases. So in a way, I can find a lot of countries in one continent, right?
Yeah, and that's the really cool thing about Antarctica is there was this Antarctic Treaty signed, I can't remember, maybe back in the 70s or 60s, and it basically agrees that no one country owns Antarctica. It is a shared continent, and it is there for scientific research, essentially. And so there are bases, many different countries have bases there. And so you could go to a US base and also a Chilean base and also a Japanese base and also a Russian base and also a New Zealand base and meet people from all these different countries who are, working and studying and doing research in Antarctica. Not everyone's, even in Antarctica, not everyone's doing research about Antarctica necessarily. It's a great place to go for astronomers and physicists because it's so remote and you have so much less interference if you're trying to study something about the universe or particle dynamics than elsewhere in the world. And so it's a really cool place. And I thought, it's such a great opportunity to go and in sort of one area you could meet people from literally all over the world, but who all have something in common and sort of ask them the same question and see. I think what you would probably find is that, a real kind of sense of unity and shared purpose and shared values. among all of these different people, no matter where they came from.
I love that idea. You kind of summarize what I'm trying to do with your last sentence. That's exactly what I want to do. And to leave on a sweet note, I want you to mention how you met your husband in Antarctica. Let's hear a little bit romance in there.
Well, we were both working on a research vessel, and we were set up as partners in a foosball tournament on the research vessel. And we were both very bad at foosball, and we didn't actually want to join the tournament, but were sort of talked into it at the last minute. So we were set up together, and we discovered, we immediately got eliminated from the tournament because we were terrible at foosball, but we ended up spending a lot of time together throughout the voyage and becoming really good friends. And then we kind of lost touch after the voyage, but reconnected a few years later, and now we're married.
That's beautiful. That's kind of a little romantic, magical story addition. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for answering all the questions beautifully. It is one of my favorite interviews ever. And I'm going to grab this little toy while we say our slogan to the cameras. We say, goodness will win.
Okay.
Together. What was this again?
This is a giant sloth.
They still survive, right?
No. Well, not the giant one. So there are, distant relatives of the sloths that you'd find, in the rainforest in Costa Rica or something. But
they used it in the animation too a little bit, right? The DMV sloths. They had that little DMV sloths. What was it? What movie was that?
Utopia.
Utopia.
Oh yes. Those are modern sloths. But the Ice Age movie has a giant sloth in it.
Oh,
Sid.
I gotta rewatch that one too.
All right.
Anyway, we're gonna say goodbye to you guys. And any last words? How can people find you and organization if they're in LA? How they can come visit you?
Oh, the Brea Tar Pits is it's usually on all the lists of top 10 things to visit in LA. A lot of people come here and don't recognize that it's a real fossil site. A lot of people think it's just another kind of fun experience like Universal Studios or Disneyland. But I would say absolutely come to the tar pits. But, when you come, you'll have the knowledge that not only is it real, it is actually the most important Ice Age fossil site in the world. And it just happens to be in the middle of Los Angeles.
Awesome. Thank you. And we're going to do a little tour now. And let's say our slogan and say goodbye first. Goodness will win. Thanks for watching us. This is so cute.